Today, I tell you the tale of how my reputation was ruined among the Tales from the Valley community and how I fought back against the scandal. For the folks that waited over 3 months since the incident for me to finally upload this, I'm sorry this took so long. For my viewers who don't know what this is about, I'll just warn you that there's sensitive topics in this video and that this will be more serious than my usual content. And before I start, I simply ask that you hear out everything I have to say before jumping to conclusions about me. I'm saying this because I've met lots of people who have seen me discuss this and immediately assume the worst of me because my stance doesn't align with theirs. And just because I disagree with people on any subject doesn't mean that I hate them, especially since we can all agree that hating people is unjustifiable, no matter which side you take. That said, I also don't want any hate directed towards people shown in this video. It doesn't help me, it doesn't help them, it only makes things worse for everybody. With that, I shall begin my tale. One February morning, I was waiting for breakfast before work, so as usual, I checked Discord to see how things were. As I opened it, I found that Spaghetti Rat, who I'll call Spag for short, had invited me to his faction, the Order of the Log C, and offered to get me in line for a bestow of Fireblade on joining, if I would, as he put it, stop being a homophobe. That seemed out of nowhere. I liked my place in House Silvermark, and I don't target people based on what they believe, so that last bit seemed unreasonable. Plus, the game was full of questionable people, some of whom were predators or encouraging unsafe content, so it seemed like he may have just DM'd the wrong guy. But Spag made it clear he was talking to me specifically by resurfacing a Discord status that I had one June that was rather poorly received. Yeah, you can probably imagine why people might look at that status and very quickly assume the worst about me, as was the case in the unofficial Tales Discord while I had it. To be clear, I disagree with LGBT on moral issues, as the agenda behind it attacks the dignity, the value, and the purpose of both humanity and family alike by forcing, yes, forcing, misconceived ideas about gender that, while seem good on paper, actually degrade and uproot everything special about the two genders in practice, while opening people up to physical and psychological abuses, a lot of which make the news. And when these ideas are challenged, the typical response of LGBT is to demonize and persecute the people who challenge these beliefs. I'll have more to explain on that later in the video, but knowing this much, you have an idea of why I can't in good faith support it or leave it unchallenged, especially since this movement won't ignore me anytime I try to ignore it. But to go so far as to call me hateful when my stance neither requires nor condones hostility to people on the basis of beliefs is unreasonable. And as I tried to explain to Spag, even the status wasn't meant to be hostile, and was meant to be a call to support traditional family values. But as I admitted to Spag, I was able to see why it was interpreted so negatively when I had tagged on the degeneracy bit. At any rate, I tried to explain my position to Spag, but as he pointed out, albeit rudely, I had simply stated that LGBT was wrong without providing evidence. He had a fair point, and after fighting my distrust towards him after previous experience with him, none of which to do with this matter, I was willing to explain in more detail. But as I tried asking questions to get an understanding of his perspective, he not only refused to answer my questions, but also spoke rather disrespectfully towards me and seemed to think what I said was irrelevant. At the same time, I was in another debate with a few other people on another topic, and dealing with work stress, so it was harder to get my thoughts in order now that Spag was getting on my nerves too. I was losing my patience, so I held off from further discussion that day, letting him know things were getting rough for me at the time, and that I would come back the next day to explain things more calmly, because I felt like I wronged Spag by not trusting him to listen, and by almost losing my temper with him over his disrespect towards me. As much of a bully and a psychopath as Spag had been, and despite my siding against Spag in game at times, I thought we were still at least on somewhat friendly terms, particularly because we seemed to be on speaking terms before, and he even invited me to fun community events I would never have known about otherwise. So I came back the next day as promised, beginning once again with my rationale behind my position, why I had the status, and what I saw wrong with the status now that I saw it again. As I walked to work that morning while preparing my explanation with a bit more evidence, since he appeared to have some desire to know, I held out some hope that we would have a more reasonable and respectful discussion than the day before. The next time I checked Discord, however, It was clear that my definition of reasonable didn't match his. When I refused to back down from my position, he went right back to being disrespectful, clearly not caring about anything I had to say, nor about what he said for that matter. He was noticeably not interested in hearing me out so much as he wanted to dictate what I believed, and villainize me for resisting him. Whether his rather impulsive replies were made out of false assumptions made against me or something else, I didn't know at the time, but I knew it wasn't worth trying to rationalize with him at that point, so I moved on. But soon after I dropped the discussion with Spag, I was kicked from Silvermark without explanation. As soon as I found out after declining a direct invitation from Raisoku himself to the coats of the Archbishop, and with no one I could ask about the kick, my hopes of getting back in seemed lost. However, I was accepted into the rings of the Golden King without any prior notice, so since I had nowhere else to turn, I joined the rings. At first, I wondered if a high rank in Silvermark was purging inactive and less known members of the faction, which seemed reasonable given there were a bunch in there already, and I was not particularly active once interest in the game had drastically died down beforehand. Soon after, I found the leader of Silvermark, known as D, so I tried to get an explanation for why I got kicked, thinking there was a mistake. D certainly didn't think it was a mistake, and refused to elaborate. But while D was unwilling to tell me directly, they were more than willing to tell others I was kicked for being, in their exact words, a weird phobe. That's when I knew the door for rejoining Silvermark was shut in my face. Accepting this disappointment, I continued on as a ring, hoping I could at least stay long enough to enjoy a few more conquests before the game became inactive once more. Unfortunately, after messing around with someone in-game who, while not inside rings at the time, had connections with rings, I was also kicked from rings without notice nor explanation, particularly since I had long left their Discord by that point. I urgently hoped to find someone who could give me a clue why, and eventually found someone who, while also assuming I knew why I was kicked, was willing to explain the reason to me after a little persistence. I can't remember the exact wording to his explanation, but he talked about how I needed to treat my fellow human beings with more respect and that I was being discriminatory. That's right, that guy too thought I was a weird phobe. The two events between Silvermark and Rings following my argument with Spag was a clear indicator that Spag was sharing our conversation with others, and almost definitely putting me in a much more negative light. I expressed my frustration to Spag shortly thereafter for betraying my trust and turning our conversation into an opportunity to get me cancelled, for lack of a better word. He cleverly tried to turn this conversation against me, and I knew full well he was willing to take things out of context in order to pin the malice on me. And just like last time, he didn't care what I had to say or how I felt about what he was doing. I gave up on him shortly after. I was way too eager to hold a grudge by that point, as if I hadn't fed him enough ammunition already for whatever vendetta he had against me. I roamed Tales as an exile, with no private factions willing to take me under their wing, barring me from conquests and insight quests, therefore barring me from a lot of the things that kept the game fun for me. As I continued to face oppression from Spag in-game and struggled in the hope that conditions would improve while they only got worse, I had to wonder if this all happened solely because our stances differed and clashed right then and there, or if Spag wanted revenge for something and finally found an opening to backstab me. With hardly anyone willing to or capable of explaining anything to me about the cause of the sudden turn against me, it was hard to get relevant facts on my case, despite having a few contacts who helped me gather information, one of which gave me some more detailed info on why I was kicked from rings. A high rank within the faction was told that I was extremely transphobic, and I was expelled from the faction accordingly. And as I would learn upon joining the Rings Discord weeks later, this high rank seemed to think that they were acting in the best interest of the faction, and for a friend's sake, and not out of any blatant hatred towards me that I could tell. But before I could rejoin the Discord server to learn that, I kept running into several dead ends while trying to tie as many loose ends as I could. I could have just given up on the community and walked away. Things certainly looked hopeless now that my reputation was effectively ruined, and that not many people still considered me a friend by that point. But if there's one thing you gotta know about me, it's that I don't give up without a fight. It was about this time when I was greeted by Doge, who on learning that I was out of a faction, compassionately tried to help me get into one. As far as I'm aware, he had no clue what transpired for me up to this point, and his attempt to get me back into Silvermark failed. He was told I couldn't join because my join request wasn't pending. But considering D rejected any of my join requests prior, for reasons you might already know, I suspect D wasn't going to let me back in, even if I sent another request in time. But while dueling some people at Kiki one night, I ended up mentioning how hard it was for me to get into a faction because of the phobe situation. And it turned out one of those people, who I'll keep anonymous for their sake, was able to give me more relevant information on how the scandal may have originated. While briefly explaining my views, at his request, and reassuring him I wasn't hateful of others whose views differed from mine, he filled me in on a few details surrounding the situation. In a group chat, some rumors were spreading that made me look anti-LGBT to a level where people thought that I was on a witch hunt. Please take this moment to remember that, while I do in fact stand against LGBT on moral issues, that stance does not include targeting or persecuting people for what they believe, both of which wouldn't benefit my cause anyway. At any rate, when I explained to my informer what was going on, some of the people who listened in may not have necessarily agreed with my position, with some of them wanting me to be quiet about my beliefs in the future, and offering suggestions to help me appear more neutral or at least less unfavorable. But whether it was because I handled myself more maturely there than I did with Spag, or because I had left a good impression on them prior to that moment, they agreed what was done to me was wrong. And with the mentioning of the group chat, it seemed quite likely that Spag was part of it. I was determined to make a statement to the community in order to show them the truth, and to hopefully ensure that Spag could not cover up anything or leave out any details. I recorded my conversation with Spag. Then, knowing how impulsive Spag could sometimes be, I tried to see if I could coax him into giving me info on why that status resurfaced months, if not at least a year, after its short lifespan. Because if this was condemning evidence of discrimination against LGBT, why didn't I get cancelled when the status was first discovered instead of when all this started? I expected Spag's answer to come with more disrespect, whether it answered my question or not, but I was a bit more prepared to deal with it that time, and the answer I got was nothing. He gave no answer. Did he no longer want to even talk to me? Did he already have what he wanted from his little scheme? Or did he have something left to hide? Knowing Spag, I suspected the worst, but there was nothing I could do about it at the time. Meanwhile, as more and more rings came back online, so did Zartania, their leader. The rings were struggling with a conquest one day, and after tracking down Zartania, I offered to help them if I could join, and he let me back into rings. In a wonderful turn of events that could only be considered poetic justice, we won that conquest against both Silvermark and Lock C. Before I managed to get into rings, Doge had invited me to Roselia on learning that the developer planned on turning Roselia into a conquest faction, which, as far as I can tell, never happened. After winning the conquest with rings, I left rings of my own accord, sent my join request to Roselia, and was accepted. This landed me in a good spot in the game, allowing me to get insight more easily, which is the hardest currency to get and the only one that lets you purify. However, in a painful twist of irony, I soon got kicked from that faction too, as one of its high ranks also considered me a weird phobe. I'll assume for all intents and purposes that this high rank was innocent of what was being perpetrated, since I later found out that they seemed to want to avoid what they thought was a potential threat. And considering the kinds of people you can find in the Tales community, I don't entirely blame them. But after the kick, I had a discussion with Doge about my situation and explained why I had been kicked from factions for the past few weeks. While he may not necessarily have agreed with my views either, he was more rational and open to discussion than any other high rank I had previously talked to. I disclosed to him my full conversation with Spag, which told him that, in spite of standing for things that seemed wrong or uncertain to him, there was nothing malicious in what I stood for. This would be especially important considering other people who, based on what they saw of the conversation between Spag and me, or perhaps just the status alone, advised Doge against trying to get me back into the faction. But Doge was able to convince the high rank to let me return to the faction on certain conditions, some of which I'm technically breaking by doing this video, but it's a risk I'm willing to take to get the truth out there. As I returned to Roselia and was able to rejoin their new Discord server, I found out just how the rumors against me had spread, and why they made people assume the worst about me. Spag had indeed shared screenshots of our conversation as I suspected. However, those screenshots contained limited context from the conversation, and it was based on that limited context alone that I was kicked out of 3 different factions in a row and looked down upon as a creep. And I learned of this evidence thanks to that very same high rank who kicked me as they shared those screenshots in the Discord chat. Those screenshots had been used to spread a false story about how I approached Spag raging with homophobia after being denied a Fireblade bestow. If you've been paying attention since the start of the video, or have seen the conversation between Spag and I, then you know for a fact that this is a lie. Spag had approached me first and accused me of homophobia with his Fireblade offer, all while discriminating against me, as we argued, because I refused to submit to him, and I turned down the bestow because I would have had to go against what I believed to get it. Where in that conversation was him denying me a bestow? I can only think at this point that Spag wanted revenge and was given an opportunity to get it. But whether or not he found the status on his own, or if someone else brought it to his attention out of nowhere, it seems clear that even if I accepted his offers, he would have used them to betray me too. And he would have had an easy way to do so. It was because of the evidence of the whole conversation and my explanation that Doge was able to help me disprove the malice that Spag was framing me with. After returning to Roselia, I managed to improve my relations with some of the remaining community, including the high rank that had kicked me before, and was able to make more progress in the game than I had over the past 3 or 4 years playing the game. The focus appeared to be back on the game for most, if not all, of the people involved in this incident, and at the end of the day, we just wanted to play the game and have fun. And thus, this tale is concluded. But what was the point of telling this story? Was it just to expose Spag and get revenge for what he did? Exposing Spag was kinda necessary considering everything that happened, but getting revenge is not the point of this video, nor was Spag the only offender really. But that said, for Spag, for those who participated in spreading the slander, and for those who discriminated against me accordingly, if you're watching this video, I want you all to know that I forgive you all. It's never healthy for anyone to dwell on hatred and unforgiveness, whether you or someone else is on the receiving end of it, because in the end, you lose yourself to those negative emotions and get consumed by them. And so I ask you to treat others as you would want them to treat you, because that is how we can defeat hate, discrimination, and injustice once and for all. With that said, the point of this video is to expose an even greater lie than the rumors Spag had spread about me, and not just the lie itself, but how it operates. That lie is the idea that oneself is more important than anyone else. That lie, known by its proper name, is pride, after which the movement associated with LGBT is named, which incidentally is also the capital sin most commonly associated with the father of lies himself. But this lie doesn't just affect LGBT, it affects everyone. Everyone has to deal with their own ego at some point if they wish to grow, and even now I'm still fighting mine. But why am I focusing my efforts on LGBT specifically in this video? Because not only is it responsible for spreading pride, but it is also one of many institutions doing the most harm to people and civilizations internationally. However, it's important for me to note that not everyone joins it because they want to be arrogant, hateful, selfish, perverted, or otherwise malicious, particularly since lots of people who join it feel as if it's the right thing to do, or at the very least, helps them get by. But as they support LGBT, they not only support the evils I just mentioned, but also things they would regret letting happen if they knew what was going on, all of which often unwittingly. It starts with a redefining of the concepts of family and the scientific understanding of gender. For example, rather than use the traditional definition of marriage as a sacred bond between a man and a woman, they see marriage as two people getting together for sexual pleasure. To the secular world, a relationship is all about what you can get out of the other person, which effectively dehumanizes spouses because instead of respecting their dignity as human beings, each with a free will and a soul of their own, this treats them as nothing more than tools or a means to an end. That secular definition is why we have so many problematic relationships and why so many families end up falling apart. Because people are more frequently treating themselves as more important than anyone else. And the answer that LGBT proposes for this is more of the same. with the most notable difference being that the partner is allowed to be of the same sex, which not only defeats the purpose of marriage to begin with, but also introduces a host of new problems, such as physical and mental illnesses, family problems, and, thanks to politicians, legal loopholes that enable abusive behaviors, of which predatory content or behavior, which people who are exposed on YouTube are commonly guilty of, are among many examples. Not only that, but by also redefining sex and gender from their proper scientific definitions in biology to a matter of personal opinion, instead of making people feel more special, they run into more questions than answers when trying to find meaning in their lives, all while being opened up to even more forms of exploitation, especially when they identify as transgender. This reasoning isn't just some ghost story that LGBT's opponents come up with. Children and teenagers who are being manipulated into believing that changing gender and that relationships with the same sex are normal when neither is the case are also being taught that their own parents aren't trustworthy, because parents are often the most adamant opponents of LGBT. Through this manipulation, adults who could care less about whether or not they believe what they preach can separate young people from those who could protect them, making them vulnerable to exploitation. And many have done so already, enabling and in many cases partaking of actions such as sexual abuse, kidnapping children from their parents or otherwise legal guardians for whatever perverted purpose, including through the court system, justifying or otherwise turning a blind eye to harassments, violent outbreaks, and even murders and mass homicides, stealing prizes and aid from the people they rightly belong to, and sharing scandalizing and predatory content with minors, including sexually explicit content, all while labeling people as discriminators and demonizing them when they protest against these things. And this is not an exhaustive list. By attacking the definition of marriage and the definition of family, people are being taught that oneself is more important than anyone else, which is destructive both to oneself and to everyone around them. No matter how well-meaning anyone might be in supporting LGBT, this is what they end up supporting, whether they realize it or not, and why I'm cautioning you all against it. But why aren't more people standing up to it and calling it out if the evidence is so clearly against it? One of the biggest reasons is fear. People are afraid of losing something if they stand up for what's right. They fear losing friends. They fear losing their good name. They fear losing their lives, or the lives of those they care about. And sometimes they fear they can't even do it right and that their efforts will be useless. I can relate to all those fears. I too was scared when I started putting this video together because I feared I would face backlash for standing up for what I believed in, despite the fact that nothing I stand for includes hostility towards others. Heck, you saw just how by saying something against LGBT, many people in the Tails community alone thought the worst of me when that status and my conversation with Spag were brought to others' attention, resulting in persecution, humiliation, and exclusion. Lots more people besides me recognize the consequences of standing up to the wicked giant, many of which face, or have faced, even worse consequences than I have, and likely will, as more of my less sympathetic viewers become aware of this video and my stance. If we want to stop this then, what must we do? For starters, treat others as we would want them to treat us. Good examples are key to leading people back on the right path, and people are more willing to listen to someone who practices what they preach, rather than someone spitting out a bunch of words because they got a bone to pick with the opposing side. And in order to face the evils being propagated by pride, we need humility, real love, and courage. Humility is the opposite of pride, where respecting others becomes more important than how others respect us. Real love is self-sacrifice, in which we choose to serve and protect the lives of others before our own, even when it's a matter of life and death. And if there's anything that evil fears most and tries its hardest to stifle, it's courage. Courage doesn't sit back and wait for a hero to emerge while evil is winning, but chooses to obstruct or thwart evil in its tracks and creates heroes in the process. And finally, to uproot evil and prevent it from ever taking root again, we must stand up for the truth, embrace the truth, and live the truth. Both male and female, the only and immutable genders of humanity, are necessary for humanity and subsequently this world to thrive. Families require a male parent and a female parent, and trying to live without one or the other poses problems for the family as a whole, which most especially resonates in the children they raise. Parents and children must work together for the best outcome of one another, because how we treat our family is crucial to how we learn to treat others. If we can't even respect our families, how well do we expect to respect other people, who may treat us with even less dignity than our parents, our siblings, and, to whom it may concern, our spouses and children? And most importantly, we need God back in our lives, the very same God who created everything wonderfully and with purpose, and commanded us to love one another as He loved us. The Creator whose very existence is proven by the very beauty and organized nature of His creation. If we cannot love God, we cannot truly love His creation, including ourselves, in the manner it deserves. And if we can't love each other as we ought, we can neither be happy nor can we survive. Nowhere in my message to you all have I left any room for hating anyone, for my stance doesn't require nor allow me to hate anybody. And as I've said, it's not good for anyone to hate anyone, regardless of which side they take. For those that want me to apologize for the status, like I said to Doge, I really can only apologize for my faulty approach because it sent the wrong message and not because I stood against the lies of LGBT. To apologize for standing up for what you know is right is cowardly, and after everything I've told you, would be quite hypocritical. That said, I agree that I needed to be way more judicious in my approach to the status if I wanted to have a chance of winning people over with it. And with that much said, I apologize for taking the wrong approach and for all the scandal that resulted, as well as all the people who were turned away from the truth as a result. And if you find my apology unacceptable, there's really nothing more I can do but keep moving forward and trying my best to do what's right. For those who believe I'm just doing this for attention, I'm gonna be fully honest. If I get positive attention from telling the truth despite the constant backlash against it, I'll consider it a miracle. But whatever attention this video gets, I hope it leads people to the truth, which will give them a better understanding of the beauty of who they truly are, because as human beings, we are a more wonderful creation than we could imagine. And that is a dignity that needs to be safeguarded. We have been blessed with so much, including things that no other creatures have, and the natural identity you have been born with is far superior than whatever anybody or anything else, even yourself, could ever give you. And by cherishing that identity, you will see yourself for how amazing you truly are, and understand the purpose you were made for. And no false rainbow can hide that truth from you if you look hard enough for it. If you've reached this far in the video, I just want to thank you for hearing me out. I originally intended to put the statement video together for the Tales community, but not only did the project drag out for a long time, but the interest of the community has shifted away from the game once again, so my audience would be too small, and let's be honest, I'm not sure how seriously that community would have taken my story or my message anyway. I instead directed this to my channel because people in general need to know the truth. Because the truth sets us free from the things that keep us down in life and opens doors to the things that truly matter. And so I conclude this video hoping that it has done what I've intended it to do, and even if my story and my message only convince a few people, or even so little as one person, I believe this video will have done its job. I will hopefully be resuming my other gaming content as planned, but if in the future I need to address other issues like this as they come up, you can safely expect there to be more videos on my channel for those things. I wish you all the best, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you guys next mission. And remember, you are wonderful, and nobody can change that.